You need to hear what this fisherman encountered in the depths. It will terrify you. In March of 2019, in the Sigsbee Deep, the deepest section of the Gulf of Mexico, a commercial fishing vessel departed from Port Fourchon, Louisiana, with a crew of 4 experienced fishermen. They were heading to waters that the local fishing community had been avoiding for almost 2 decades. The area had a reputation that went back generations among Gulf fishermen. Between 1998 and 2018, 11 fishing vessels had sent distress calls from within a 15-mile radius of the same coordinates, all reporting equipment failures, hull damage, or crew members lost overboard under circumstances that made no sense. 7 of those vessels made it back to port with damaged hulls that showed impact marks the Coast Guard couldn't explain. 4 vessels were found abandoned, engines still running, navigation systems still active, but every crew member gone. The Coast Guard attributed the incidents to rough weather, equipment malfunctions, and the inherent dangers of deep-sea fishing in unpredictable waters. The fishermen who worked those waters knew better. They told stories passed down through 3 generations about something that lived in the deepest part of the trench, about boats that came back with hull damage that looked like something had tried to pull them under, about experienced captains who simply vanished from their wheelhouses in calm seas, about sounds that came up from the depths on still nights, sounds that didn't match any known marine life. The 4 men who took their boat into those waters in March 2019 were not amateurs. They had been fishing the Gulf their entire lives. They had weathered hurricanes, navigated through tropical storms, and handled every challenge the ocean could throw at commercial fishermen. They believed the stories were exaggerations designed to keep competition away from productive fishing grounds. By the time they understood the truth, 2 of them were dead. A third was pulled into water so deep his body would never be recovered. The 4th made it back to port 3 days later, in a boat that was barely floating, with hull damage that required the vessel to be declared a total loss. He told the Coast Guard what had happened in those waters. His statement was recorded, filed, and the area was quietly designated as a navigation hazard zone 6 months later. Commercial fishing permits for that section of the Gulf have not been issued since. What you're about to hear is the account, the fisherman's account. My name is Terence, and this happened to me in March of 2019, about 140 miles southwest of Port Fourchon, Louisiana, in the deepest waters of the Gulf of Mexico. I was 47 years old at the time. My family had been fishing the Gulf for 4 generations. My great-grandfather worked shrimp boats out of Grand Isle in the 1920s, before the oil industry transformed the Louisiana coast. He taught my grandfather everything about reading the Gulf, understanding its moods, predicting where the fish would run. My grandfather passed that knowledge to my father, who passed it to me starting when I was 6 years old and continuing until I could captain a boat as well as any man working those waters. Fishing wasn't just work for us. It was identity. It was connection to the water and to the generations that came before. My family had seen the Gulf through every change, through the oil booms, through Katrina and Rita, and every hurricane that had torn through the coast, through the Deepwater Horizon disaster that poisoned the water and killed the livelihoods of thousands of fishermen. We survived because we knew the Gulf better than anyone. We knew which waters were worth working and which waters were best left alone. There was one area we had always avoided, a section of the Sigsbee Deep, about 140 miles offshore, where the seafloor drops to almost 14,000 feet, the deepest water in the entire Gulf of Mexico. My grandfather had warned my father about that area when my father was young enough to still listen to warnings. He had been specific about it. He had marked it on charts, drawn boundaries showing exactly which coordinates to avoid. He said something lived down there in the deep trench, something that had been there since before oil rigs, before shrimp boats, before anyone had mapped those waters, something that didn't like surface activity above its territory. My father passed the warning to me with the same seriousness. He told me about a friend of his father's, a captain named Rousseau, who had taken his boat into the Sigsbee Deep in 1979 to chase a massive school of yellowfin tuna that had been tracked on sonar. Rousseau's boat came back 4 days later with the hull cracked in 3 places. The entire port side looked like something enormous had rammed it from below. Rousseau and his crew said they had hit submerged debris. But debris doesn't follow a boat. Debris doesn't circle beneath the hull for 6 hours before striking. Rousseau never fished again after that trip. He sold his boat and moved inland to Lafayette. My father said Rousseau wouldn't even look at the ocean after 1979, wouldn't go near the coast, wouldn't talk about what happened in the Sigsbee Deep. I had always assumed the warnings were superstition, old fishermen protecting their favorite spots with sea stories. Every fishing community has tales of haunted waters and cursed trenches. The Gulf was no different, but I had respected my father's wishes while he was alive, and I had never tested those boundaries. I fished all around that section of the Gulf, working productive grounds to the east and west, but I never crossed the coordinates my grandfather had marked on those old charts. My father died in the winter of 2018. Heart failure took him fast, 2 weeks from the first symptoms to the end. I was with him in the hospital when he passed, and in those final days he talked about things we had never discussed before. The Gulf, the stories, the reasons 3 generations of my family had steered clear of the Sigsbee Deep. He told me his father had seen something come up from those depths in 1952, something that surfaced near his boat on a calm morning, something that was too large to be a whale and moved in ways that didn't match any creature he had ever seen. My grandfather never described what he saw in detail. He just said it looked at the boat, considered it, then went back down into the trench and didn't surface again. That was when the warnings started. That was when our family's tradition of avoiding that particular section of water began. I thought about my father's words for months after he died. I thought about Rousseau and the damaged hull. I thought about the stories and the warnings and the strange reluctance that had kept 3 generations of my family away from some of the deepest and potentially most productive fishing grounds in the Gulf. By March, I had made a decision. I was tired of avoiding a section of ocean because of stories. I was tired of respecting boundaries that were based on superstition and fear. I was 47 years old, experienced, and capable of handling anything the Gulf could throw at me. I decided I would take my boat out there and see for myself what all the fuss was about. The crew I called 3 men I trusted. All of them were experienced deepwater fishermen who had worked the Gulf their entire lives. Marcus was 52, a former Navy man who had served on destroyers before coming home to Louisiana to fish. He was built like a dock piling, 6'3" and 240 pounds of muscle earned from decades of hauling nets and working winches. He had been fishing with me for almost 20 years. Nothing rattled Marcus. He had seen combat in the Persian Gulf during the First Iraq War. He had weathered Category 4 hurricanes on open water. He approached every challenge with the same calm competence that had made him invaluable as a crewman. Vincent was 44, my wife's brother, a deckhand who could read sonar better than anyone I had ever worked with. He was smaller than Marcus, wiry and quick, with reflexes that made him deadly efficient at handling lines and operating equipment. Vincent had an intuition about fish behavior that bordered on supernatural. He could predict where schools would move before they showed up on sonar. He had saved us from running gear into underwater obstructions more times than I could count. The third man was younger. Clay was 29, the son of another fishing family from Duloc. He had been working boats since he was 14 and had earned a reputation as one of the hardest working deckhands on the coast. He was strong, reliable, and hungry to prove himself as someone who could handle the deep water runs that older fishermen avoided. I told all 3 of them what I was planning. I explained about the area my family had always avoided. I described the warnings my grandfather and father had given me. I told them about Rousseau and the damaged hull and the stories that had circulated through the fishing community for decades. I explained that I wanted to work the Sigsbee Deep for yellowfin and possibly swordfish, species that ran in those waters but were rarely targeted because so few boats were willing to fish that far offshore in such deep water. All 3 agreed to come without hesitation. Marcus said the best way to kill a ghost story was to sail right through it and catch fish while you were doing it. Vincent said he had heard similar stories about other deep water locations. Every time someone actually worked those areas, the fishing turned out to be excellent and the stories turned out to be nothing. Clay said he wanted to be part of the crew that finally broke the superstition and opened up new grounds for the Port Fourchon fleet. We spent the week before the trip preparing the boat and studying charts of the area. My boat was a 58-foot commercial fishing vessel, the Anna Marie, named after my mother. Steel hull, twin diesel engines, full electronic suite including GPS, sonar, radar, and radio equipment. The boat could handle rough seas and had enough fuel capacity to stay out for a week if needed. We loaded enough provisions for 5 days, ice for the catch, bait, tackle, safety equipment, everything we needed for a standard deep-water run. The weather forecast looked perfect. Clear skies, light winds, calm seas. We departed Port Fourchon on a Tuesday morning just after dawn. The Gulf was glass calm as we cleared the barrier islands and headed south into open water. The oil rigs passed on either side of us as we ran, massive structures rising from the water like industrial cathedrals. By noon we were beyond the rig fields, in water that showed nothing but horizon in every direction. The journey to the deep, the run to the Sigsbee Deep, took 8 hours at cruising speed. We passed the time the way crews always do, talking, playing cards, checking equipment. Marcus told stories about his Navy days. Vincent worked the sonar, tracking schools of fish as we passed over them. Clay organized the deck, making sure everything was secured and ready for when we started working. The water changed color as we moved into deeper territory. The bright blue-green of the continental shelf gave way to darker blue, then to a deep indigo that looked almost black in certain light. The sonar showed the bottom dropping away beneath us. 200 feet, 500 feet, 1,000 feet. By the time we reached the coordinates I had marked, the depth gauge read 12,400 feet, almost 2.5 miles of water beneath the hull. Vincent pointed out something on the sonar, a massive school of something, probably yellowfin tuna, holding at about 400 feet down, exactly what we were looking for. I cut the engines and we started rigging lines. The fishing was incredible. Within the first hour, we had landed 6 yellowfin, each over 100 pounds. Beautiful fish, thick and heavy, the kind of catch that made the long run worthwhile. Marcus was grinning as he worked the gaff. Vincent was calling out targets on the sonar, directing us to where the fish were holding. Clay was handling lines like he had been born to it. By late afternoon, we had pulled over 30 yellowfin from the water. The fish hold was filling up fast. At this rate, we would have a full boat by the end of the second day. I was already calculating what the catch would bring at market. I was thinking about how my father had been wrong to avoid this area, how my grandfather's warnings had cost our family decades of productive fishing in some of the best waters in the Gulf. We worked until the sun started going down. The sky turned orange and red along the western horizon. The water went flat and still, not a breath of wind, the kind of calm that usually means good weather ahead. We secured the lines and cleaned the deck as darkness settled over the Gulf. I started the generator to power the lights and the refrigeration in the hold. Marcus cooked dinner on the galley stove. We ate on the deck, watching stars appear in a sky that showed no light pollution from shore. Vincent mentioned something that I had noticed but hadn't wanted to say out loud. The sonar was acting strange. The fish we had been tracking all afternoon had disappeared, not gradually, the way schools normally disperse as they move to different depths or locations. They had just vanished from the screen. 1 minute, the sonar showed massive concentrations of biomass at multiple depths. The next minute, the screen was empty, just the bottom signal at 12,400 feet and nothing between the surface and the seafloor. Marcus said maybe we had fished them out. Maybe we had caught so many that the school had moved to a different location. I checked the sonar settings. Everything was working correctly. I adjusted the range and sensitivity. Still nothing. The Gulf was empty, as if every living thing in the water had evacuated the area. Clay asked if that was normal. I told him no. I had fished the Gulf for over 40 years and had never seen sonar go completely blank in waters this productive. There should have been something showing up. Bait fish, squid, sharks. The ocean is never empty, but the sonar showed nothing. The first sign. Around midnight, I was in the wheelhouse checking the weather radar when the boat moved. Not rocked by waves. The water was still calm. The boat just moved, shifted, like something large had passed beneath the hull and displaced enough water to push the entire vessel sideways. I went out on deck. Marcus was standing near the stern, looking over the side. He had felt it too. He said it felt like something big had swum under us, maybe a whale. But whales don't typically come into water this deep, and we hadn't seen any surface activity all day. Vincent came up from below. He had been checking the fish hold when the boat moved. He said he had felt the shift too. He went to the sonar and stared at the screen. Still nothing, just the bottom signal. We stood on deck for maybe 20 minutes watching the water. The Gulf was absolutely still. No wind, no waves, just flat black water reflecting the stars. The generator hummed. The boat's lights cast circles on the surface that didn't reach far into the dark. I told everyone to get some rest. We would start fishing again at dawn. Marcus took first watch. He sat in the wheelhouse with a cup of coffee, monitoring the instruments. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I kept thinking about the way the boat had moved, about the empty sonar, about my father's warnings. I was staring at the ceiling of my cabin when I heard Marcus shout. I was on deck in seconds. Marcus was in the wheelhouse, pointing at the sonar screen. Something was showing up, something big, a single massive return, rising from the bottom. 12,000 feet, 11,000 feet, 10,000 feet. The contact was moving fast, ascending through the water column at a speed that didn't match any marine life I knew. Whales don't move that fast vertically. Neither do sharks or any other large predator. 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet, 7,000 feet. Vincent was beside me now, watching the screen. He said it was too big to be a fish. The return was showing something at least 60 feet long, maybe more, moving straight up toward the surface. 6,000 feet, 5,000 feet. 4,000 feet. Clay came up from below, asking what was happening. I told him to be quiet. We all watched the sonar. 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet. The contact was directly beneath us now. still rising, still moving at that impossible speed. 500 feet, 400 feet, 300 feet. Marcus turned on the deck lights. The powerful floodlights illuminated the water around the boat in harsh white light. We all moved to the railing and looked down into the water. Something was coming up from the depths. I could see it now, a shape in the water, pale, massive, moving vertically toward the surface. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet, and then it stopped. The sonar showed the contact holding position at 50 feet directly beneath the boat, not moving, just sitting there in the water column. 50 feet below us. We stared down into the lit water. I could see the shape more clearly now, long, segmented, with appendages that didn't look like fins. The body was pale, almost white, with a texture that looked rough and plated. It was looking up at us. I don't know how I knew that. I couldn't see eyes or a head, but I could feel its attention, the way you can feel when someone is watching you from across a room. Vincent whispered that we should start the engines. We should move. We should get out of this area right now. I agreed with him. I turned toward the wheelhouse. That's when the boat lurched. The attack. The entire vessel shifted violently to starboard. I grabbed the railing to keep from going over. Marcus slammed into the wheelhouse door. Clay hit the deck hard. The boat tilted at an angle that shouldn't have been possible in calm water. I looked over the side and saw what was happening. Something was wrapped around the hull. Multiple somethings. Long appendages that looked like arms but weren't arms. They were too long and too thick, and they were covered in what looked like overlapping plates of white armor. The appendages were pulling the boat down, pulling the starboard side toward the water. I could hear the hull groaning under the pressure, could hear metal creaking. Marcus was back on his feet. He ran to the gear locker and pulled out a flare gun. He fired it directly at the appendages wrapped around the hull. The flare hit one of them and bounced off. The armored plating didn't even seem to notice. The boat tilted further. Water started coming over the starboard railing. Vincent was in the wheelhouse, trying to start the engines. I heard the diesels turn over, but they wouldn't catch. Something was wrong. The boat's systems weren't responding. Clay was screaming. I turned and saw one of the appendages coming over the railing. It was massive, at least 4 feet in diameter. The plating on the surface was made of overlapping segments that looked like bone or shell. The appendage moved like a tentacle, but the movement was too controlled, too purposeful. The end of the appendage had something that looked like a hand, not a human hand, something with too many fingers, each finger ending in a curved talon that looked like it could punch through steel. The hand grabbed Clay by the torso. He screamed once, a short, sharp sound. Then the appendage pulled him over the railing and into the water. He was gone in less than a second, just gone. Pulled down into the depths so fast I barely saw him go under. Marcus fired another flare. This one hit the appendage that had taken Clay. The flare burned against the plating for a moment, then fell into the water. The appendage didn't react. It just slid back over the railing and disappeared beneath the surface. The boat was still tilted at a dangerous angle. More appendages were wrapping around the hull. I could feel them tightening, squeezing. The metal groaned louder. Vincent got the engines started. The diesels roared to life. He threw them into forward at full throttle. The boat lurched ahead but didn't move far. The appendages were holding us. The engines screamed as the propellers fought against whatever was gripping the hull. Something breached the surface on the port side. A section of the creature's body. It was massive. At least 40 feet of segmented pale armor rose out of the water like a breaching whale. But it wasn't a whale. The segments moved independently, articulated, controlled. I saw what looked like a head, elongated, covered in the same plating, with a mouth that opened vertically instead of horizontally. The mouth was filled with rows of hooked teeth, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all pointing backward into a throat that looked like it went down forever. The head turned toward the boat. I saw eyes, multiple eyes, too many eyes, arranged in rows along the sides of the head. Each eye was dark and reflective, catching the light from the deck floods and throwing it back at us. The creature looked at us for maybe 3 seconds. Then it made a sound, not a whale sound, not anything I had ever heard from any ocean creature. It was a vibration, deep and resonant. It went through the boat, through the water, through my chest. I could feel it in my bones. Marcus fired another flare directly at the head. The flare hit one of the eyes. The creature reacted. It dove. The entire mass of it went back down into the water. The appendages around the hull released. The boat righted itself so fast we all fell to the deck. The engines were still running at full throttle. We shot forward across the calm water. I scrambled to the wheelhouse and took control. I steered us away from where the creature had surfaced. I pushed the engines as hard as they would go. The Anna Marie was doing almost 20 knots, running flat out across water that was still unnaturally calm. Vincent was checking the sonar. He said the contact was following us, still at depth. still keeping pace beneath the hull, moving at the same speed we were moving, 12,000 feet down in the trench, matching our course and speed perfectly. I ran the boat for 30 minutes at full throttle, burning fuel we couldn't afford to waste, trying to put distance between us and whatever was following. The sonar showed the contact staying with us the entire time. Finally, I cut back to cruising speed. I needed to save fuel. We were still over 130 miles from port. If we burned through our tanks running at full throttle, we wouldn't make it back. The contact stayed below us at 12,000 feet, not rising, not falling, just keeping pace. Marcus asked what we were going to do. His voice was shaking. I had never heard Marcus sound scared before. I said we were going to maintain heading toward port. We were going to keep moving and hope whatever was down there lost interest. Vincent asked what happened to Clay. Neither Marcus nor I answered. We all knew what happened to Clay. We had seen him pulled over the railing. We had seen him dragged into water that was 12,000 feet deep. There was no hope of recovery, no hope of survival. Clay was gone. The long night. We ran through the night. The creature stayed below us, always at 12,000 feet, always matching our speed and heading perfectly. Around 3 in the morning, the engines started making a wrong sound, a grinding noise that got louder as we ran. Vincent went below to check. He came back up 5 minutes later looking pale. He said something had damaged the port engine. The propeller shaft was bent. He didn't know how it had been damaged, but the engine was going to fail if we kept running it under load. I cut the port engine and continued on the starboard engine alone. Our speed dropped to about 12 knots. The contact below us adjusted its speed to match. Marcus pointed out something I had been trying not to think about. If the creature wanted to, it could have destroyed the boat. Those appendages were strong enough to crush the hull. Whatever we had seen breach the surface was large enough to capsize us. But it hadn't done either of those things. It had grabbed Clay and then backed off. Now it was just following us, staying deep, watching. Vincent said maybe it was waiting for something. Maybe it was herding us, pushing us towards something else. I checked the navigation. We were still over the Sigsbee Deep. The bottom was still over 10,000 feet down. We wouldn't reach shallower water for another 6 hours at our current speed. The sky started to lighten around 5 in the morning. Dawn came as a grey line on the eastern horizon. The Gulf was still flat calm. No wind, no waves, just our boat moving across water that looked like dark glass. The starboard engine started making the same grinding sound the port engine had made. Vincent went below again. He came back up and said the starboard propeller shaft was also damaged. Both shafts were bent. Both engines were failing. I didn't understand how both shafts could be bent. They were solid steel. They were designed to handle the stress of pushing a 58-foot boat through heavy seas. Bending them would require force that shouldn't be possible from underwater collision or debris strike. Unless something had grabbed the propellers and bent the shafts deliberately. The starboard engine died at 6 in the morning. We were dead in the water, drifting in 11,000 feet of ocean with no propulsion and something massive circling beneath us. I tried to restart the engines. Neither one would turn over. The starters clicked, but the shafts wouldn't rotate. The engines were locked up. Marcus suggested we radio the Coast Guard, tell them we had a disabled vessel and needed assistance. I tried the radio, got nothing but static. The VHF wasn't working. The SSB wasn't working. Even the satellite phone was dead. All our communication equipment was dead, and I had checked all of it the day before we left port. Everything had been working perfectly. Everything had been tested and certified. Vincent looked at the sonar. The contact was still there, still at 12,000 feet, but now it was circling, making a slow circle beneath us with a radius of about half a mile. I went below and tried to assess the damage. The engine room smelled like hot metal and seawater. Both propeller shafts had water leaking around the seals. Not a lot, but enough to show that the shafts had been moved in ways they weren't designed to move. The entire stern section of the boat felt wrong, like the hull itself had been stressed beyond its limits. I could see hairline cracks in some of the welds, could see places where the metal had been bent and then released. Something had grabbed the boat and squeezed it, hard enough to damage steel, hard enough to bend propeller shafts and crack welds. Then it had let go, and now it was waiting. Circling beneath us, in the deepest water in the Gulf. The second attack, the boat started drifting northeast with the current. Slow, maybe half a knot. Not fast enough to get us anywhere useful, but fast enough to make us move away from where the creature was circling. At 7 in the morning, the sonar showed the contact rising again. 11,000 feet, 10,000 feet, 9,000 feet. Marcus grabbed a boat hook, the pole with the curved hook we used for pulling lines and fenders. It was a useless weapon against something that could bend steel propeller shafts, but it was all we had. 8,000 feet, 7,000 feet, 6,000 feet. Vincent started throwing things over the side. Bait, equipment, anything that might distract whatever was coming up. The objects sank into the dark water and disappeared. 5,000 feet, 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet. But the water around the boat started to move, not waves, a current, like something large was displacing water as it rose. The boat spun slowly in the current, turning clockwise, going through a full rotation in about 30 seconds. 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 500 feet. I saw the shape in the water, massive and pale, coming up directly beneath the boat. 200 feet, 100 feet, 50 feet. Marcus was at the railing with the boat hook, ready to fight something that was 60 feet long and armored like a tank. The creature surfaced alongside the boat instead of beneath it, 20 feet away from the hull. Most of its body stayed underwater, but I could see the segmented armor plates, could see the appendages, could see rows of eyes looking at us. The head breached, that vertical mouth opened. The throat beyond was black and seemed to absorb light. I could smell it now, something between rotting fish and deep ocean mud. The creature made that sound again, the vibration that went through everything. I felt my chest compress, felt my vision blur. The sound was too deep, too powerful. It wasn't meant for human ears. Then the mouth closed, and the creature dove. It went straight down. The sonar tracked it, descending at incredible speed. 500 feet, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet. It stopped at 3,000 feet, directly beneath us again, and then the boat lurched. We were moving. Something was pulling the boat, pulling us through the water against the current. I could feel it in the hull, a constant, steady pull from below. The sonar showed the contact at 3,000 feet, still holding position beneath us, not rising, not descending, but we were moving, accelerating, going from half a knot to 2 knots to 5 knots. Marcus asked what was happening. I said the creature was towing us, pulling the boat through the water, taking us somewhere. Vincent checked the navigation. We were moving southeast, back toward the deepest part of the Sigsbee Deep, back toward the coordinates where we had first started fishing. The creature pulled us for 6 hours. We couldn't stop it, couldn't cut free because there was nothing to cut. The boat just moved through the water like it was attached to an invisible tow cable 3,000 feet long. Marcus tried everything. He threw more flares. He beat on the hull with a hammer, trying to make noise that might scare it away. He even fired a flare gun straight down into the water, hoping the light would make it release us. Nothing worked. The creature just kept pulling, steady and relentless. By noon, the GPS showed we were back where we started, right over the deepest part of the trench, 14,000 feet of water beneath the hull. The boat stopped moving. The creature released us. The sonar showed it descending, 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet, going back down into the trench. It disappeared from the sonar at 13,000 feet, just gone, like it had never been there. The silence. We drifted for hours after that. The Gulf was absolutely silent. No engine noise because we had no engines. No waves because there was no wind. No birds because we were too far from shore. Just 3 men on a disabled boat floating over the deepest water in the Gulf. Marcus worked on the engines. He spent hours below decks, trying to free the propeller shafts, trying to get even one engine running. He came up covered in grease and seawater and said it was no use. The shafts were bent too badly. The engines were destroyed. Vincent tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. He checked every piece of communication equipment we had. All of it was dead, not just broken, dead, like something had fried every circuit at the same time. I inventoried our situation. We had food for another 3 days, water for 4. The boat was taking on water slowly through the damaged propeller shaft seals. Not fast enough to sink us immediately, but fast enough that we would have a problem in 24 hours if we couldn't pump it out. The bilge pumps were electric. They ran off the generators. I tried to start the main generator. It turned over but wouldn't run. The backup generator did the same thing. We had no power, no propulsion, no communication. And we were drifting in 14,000 feet of water with something massive circling beneath us. The sun started going down around 7. The temperature dropped fast. The Gulf at night in March is cold when you don't have heat. We huddled in the wheelhouse, sharing blankets, watching the sonar screen that showed nothing but the bottom signal. Around midnight, Vincent pointed at something. The sonar was showing returns again, not the big contact, smaller ones, hundreds of them, rising from the bottom. The fish were coming back, schools of yellowfin, probably the same ones we had been catching 2 days ago, swimming back into the area like nothing had happened. Marcus said maybe the creature was gone. Maybe it had left and the normal marine life was returning. I didn't believe that. Something about the timing felt wrong. The creature pulls us back to this exact spot, releases us, disappears, and then all the fish come back. That wasn't coincidence. It was a trap. Marcus goes over. At 2 in the morning, Marcus said he was going out on deck to check the hull damage, see if there was anything we could do to slow the water intake. Vincent and I stayed in the wheelhouse. We were both exhausted. Neither of us had slept in over 48 hours. I was staring at the sonar screen when I heard Marcus shout. I ran outside. The deck was empty. Marcus was gone. I heard splashing. I looked over the side and saw him in the water, 20 feet from the boat. He was thrashing, screaming. Something had him. I grabbed a life ring and threw it. The ring landed next to Marcus, but he couldn't reach it. He was being pulled, dragged through the water away from the boat. Vincent appeared next to me with a spotlight. He aimed the beam at Marcus. I saw what had him. An appendage was wrapped around his legs, the same kind of appendage that had grabbed Clay, pale and segmented and armored, pulling Marcus away from the boat with steady, relentless force. Marcus went under, came back up, went under again. He wasn't screaming anymore, just trying to breathe, trying to stay on the surface. The appendage pulled him down one more time. He didn't come back up. The water went still. The spotlight showed nothing but flat black surface reflecting the beam back at us. Vincent swept the light across the water, looking for any sign of Marcus, any chance he might surface. The light caught something about 50 feet from the boat. Marcus was floating face down, not moving. The appendage was still wrapped around his legs, pulling him slowly toward the depths. Then he was gone, pulled under. The water closed over him, and we never saw him again. Vincent and I stood at the railing for maybe an hour, neither of us speaking, neither of us able to process what had just happened. Two men dead, two experienced fishermen who had worked the Gulf their entire lives, taken by something that shouldn't exist, something that lived in the deepest water where no light reached and no human had ever gone. The final day dawn came grey and cold. Vincent and I were the only ones left. We sat in the wheelhouse and watched the sun come up over water that looked like it had never known violence. The sonar showed fish at every depth. The Gulf looked normal again, productive, safe, but we knew better. Vincent said we needed a plan. We were drifting, taking on water, no power, no communication. If we didn't do something, we were going to die out here. I agreed with him. I said we could try to rig a sail using tarps and poles, try to catch wind and move the boat toward shore. It was a long shot, but it was something. We spent the morning working on it. We found canvas in a storage locker, found aluminum poles we could lash together. It wasn't a proper sail, but it might give us enough movement to drift toward shallower water. We were securing the makeshift mast when the sonar alarm went off. A contact, rising from the bottom, same size as before, same speed, 13,000 feet, 12,000 feet, 11,000 feet. Vincent looked at me. His face was white. He said we needed to get in the life raft. We needed to abandon ship right now. I told him the life raft wouldn't help. Whatever was down there could reach us just as easily in a raft as on the boat, probably easier. 10,000 feet, 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet. The contact was coming up fast, faster than it had risen before, like it was in a hurry. 7,000 feet, 6,000 feet, 5,000 feet. I went to the railing and looked down into the water. I could see it now, the pale shape rising through the dark, massive and segmented and coming straight for us. 4,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet. Vincent was beside me. He was holding a knife, a filleting knife, from the galley, 6 inches of sharp steel that would be completely useless against what was coming. 1,000 feet, 500 feet, 200 feet. The creature surfaced 10 feet from the boat. Most of its body stayed underwater, but the head breached. That vertical mouth opened. The throat beyond was black. I saw the rows of eyes. I saw the plated armor. I saw appendages as thick as tree trunks rising from the water on both sides of the boat. Vincent screamed and jumped. He jumped off the boat, away from the creature, into open water on the opposite side. I heard him hit the water, heard him start swimming, trying to put distance between himself and the boat. The creature dove. It went under so fast the displacement created a wave that rocked the boat. The sonar showed it descending, but not straight down. It was moving laterally, toward where Vincent had jumped. I ran to the opposite railing. I saw Vincent in the water, swimming hard, moving away from the boat with strong, steady strokes. Then something pale surfaced beneath him, an appendage wrapped around his torso. He didn't even have time to scream. He was just pulled under, gone in an instant. The water closed over him. The sonar showed the contact descending. Vincent was going down with it. 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. I watched the sonar, watched Vincent's last moments tracked as a depth reading. 4,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 6,000 feet. The pressure at that depth would crush a human body, turn bone to powder, collapse lungs, implode organs. Vincent was dead long before he reached the bottom. The sonar showed the contact descending all the way to 13,000 feet. Then it stopped. It stayed there, didn't rise again. Just held position at the bottom of the trench. Alone, I was alone on a dead boat, drifting over the deepest water in the Gulf. The boat was taking on more water now. The bilge was half full, and I couldn't pump it out. The stern was riding lower than it should. The bow was coming up. The boat was beginning to list. I had maybe 6 hours before the Anna Marie sank. I tried the radio again. Static. I tried the satellite phone. Dead. I tried everything. Nothing worked. I thought about what my father had said, about the warnings, about Rousseau and the damaged hull, about the thing my grandfather had seen surface in 1952. 3 generations of warnings, ignored because I thought I knew better. Around noon the wind picked up, just a light breeze from the southwest, but it was wind. Our makeshift sail caught it. The boat started moving, slowly, maybe half a knot, but it was movement. I secured the tiller and let the wind push us northeast, toward shallower water, toward the coast. It would take days at this speed, but it was a chance. The sonar showed the contact still at 13,000 feet. It hadn't moved since taking Vincent. It was just sitting there on the bottom, waiting. I sailed through the afternoon. The wind held steady. By evening I had covered maybe 5 miles. The depth gauge showed 12,800 feet. I was leaving the deepest part of the trench. By midnight the depth had increased to 11,000 feet. Still deep, still over the trench, but moving in the right direction. The sonar showed the contact rising. 10,000 feet, 9,000 feet, 8,000 feet. I knew what was coming. I secured everything I could. I wedged myself into the wheelhouse with a rope tied around my waist and anchored to the wheel. 7,000 feet, 6,000 feet, 5,000 feet. The creature surfaced alongside the boat, closer than it had come before, maybe 6 feet from the hull. I could see details I hadn't noticed before. The plating wasn't bone or shell. It was something else. Something that looked organic, but wasn't quite organic, like the material had grown into the shape of armor, but wasn't armor. The eyes weren't just eyes, they were windows. I could see something moving behind them, something that looked like thought, like intelligence. This wasn't an animal. It wasn't a creature operating on instinct or hunger. It was something that understood, something that knew what it was doing. It looked at me. All those eyes focused on the wheelhouse, focused on me. I felt its attention like weight. Then it made that sound, the vibration that went through everything. But this time it felt different, not aggressive, not a threat. It felt like communication, like the creature was trying to tell me something. The sound faded. The creature dove. It went straight down and didn't come back. The sonar showed it descending to 13,000 feet and then disappearing from the screen entirely, like it had never been there. The rescue I sailed for 3 days. The wind held. The boat stayed afloat despite the water in the bilge. The depth gauge showed the bottom rising steadily as I moved northeast. 11,000 feet, 9,000 feet, 7,000 feet, 5,000 feet. On the morning of the 4th day, I saw a helicopter. Coast Guard. They had been searching for us. Vincent's wife had reported us overdue. The Coast Guard had launched a search pattern based on our filed float plan. They found me 80 miles south of Port Fourchon in 3,000 feet of water. They hoisted me off the Anna Marie and left the boat to sink. It went down 6 hours later. I spent 2 days in the hospital. Dehydration, exhaustion, shock. They treated me and released me. The Coast Guard investigation focused on the damage to the boat. They brought up the propeller shafts after the Anna Marie sank. They examined them. They said the shafts had been bent with force that shouldn't have been possible from any natural collision or impact. They asked what had happened to my crew. I told them the truth. I said something in the deep water had attacked us, something large and aggressive that had pulled 3 men into the Gulf. They wrote down everything I said. They filed the report. Then they told me the official finding would be that we had suffered equipment failure in heavy seas, and 3 crew members had been lost overboard in rough weather. I told them the seas had been calm. I told them the creature was real. I told them other boats had reported similar incidents in that area. They said there was no evidence of anything unusual. They said the damaged shafts could be explained by impact with debris or submerged containers. They said the crew deaths were tragic but consistent with the hazards of commercial fishing in deep water. 6 months later, the section of the Gulf where we had been fishing was designated a navigation hazard zone. Commercial fishing permits for that area were suspended indefinitely. The official reason was unexplained magnetic anomalies that could interfere with navigation equipment. But I know the real reason. Someone in the Coast Guard or NOAA or the Department of the Interior understood what was out there. They understood that something lived in the Sigsbee Deep that killed people who got too close, and they decided the best approach was to keep people away. What lives below? I researched what I could after I recovered. I found references going back over 100 years, not just from the Gulf, but from deep trenches all over the world. The Mariana Trench in the Pacific, accounts from Japanese fishermen in the 1930s, about boats that were pulled down by something massive that rose from depths where no life should exist. The Peru-Chile Trench, stories from Chilean fishing communities about creatures that surfaced on calm nights, creatures that were pale and segmented and had too many appendages. The Tonga Trench, reports from the 1970s of research vessels that lost equipment to something that came up from below and stripped instruments off their cables. Every deep trench has stories. Every fishing community that works those waters has warnings that go back generations. And every official investigation concludes that the incidents were caused by equipment failure, bad weather, or human error. But the fishermen know better. The people who actually work those waters understand what lives in the deepest parts of the ocean, in places where no light reaches, in trenches so deep that the pressure would crush a submarine, in environments that humans have barely explored. Something adapted to that environment, something that evolved in the deep, something that grew large in the darkness and learned to defend its territory. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's been there for thousands of years or millions of years. I don't know if there's just one or if there are many of them. And I don't know what it wanted, why it took Clay and Marcus and Vincent but let me live. Vincent said the creature was herding us, pushing us where it wanted us to go. Marcus said it was playing with us, testing us. I think it was something else. I think it was showing us something, teaching us that the deep water belongs to it, that humans are visitors in an environment we don't understand, that we need to respect the boundaries between our world and the world that exists beneath the surface. My father was right to warn me. His father was right to warn him. Something ancient and powerful lives in the Sigsbee Deep, and it has been there far longer than any boat has sailed those waters. I survived because I was the one it chose to send back, to tell the story, to pass the warning to another generation. I don't fish anymore. I sold my permits. I haven't been on a boat since the Coast Guard helicopter lifted me off the Anna Marie. I live inland now, as far from the Gulf as I can get while still staying in Louisiana. Because I know what's out there. I know it's still hunting, still defending its territory, still taking anyone who crosses the boundaries that were marked by generations of fishermen who understood what their grandfathers had tried to tell them. The Sigsbee Deep is closed to commercial fishing. The area is marked as a hazard, but it's only a matter of time before someone ignores the warnings, before someone decides the stories are exaggerations, before someone takes a boat into those waters and finds out why the old fishermen avoided that section of the Gulf. And when that happens, the creature will be waiting, watching from depths no human has ever reached, ready to defend what has always belonged to it. 3 men are still out there, somewhere in the trench. Clay, Marcus, Vincent, their bodies were never recovered. But I know where they are. I know they went down into darkness so complete that light has never touched it, into pressure so intense that their bodies would have been compressed into nothing, into a place where something massive and ancient makes its home. And I know they weren't the first, and they won't be the last.